Gladue reports come from the case R v. Gladue, which happened in 1999. A woman was accused of murdering her husband, and the courts failed to take into account her Aboriginal background. Therefore, Gladue reports were made. As a group, we found several different definitions that describe Gladue reports all a little differently. However, overall, a Gladue report is a pre-sentencing report that the court uses when sentencing Aboriginal people. It takes into consideration the background of the individual and the effects it has had. The foundation of Gladue reports comes from Section 718.2e of the Criminal Code, which outlines the circumstances judges must consider when sentencing Aboriginal people. Due to the specific difficulties Aboriginals have faced, their backgrounds impact the amount of crime committed. These reports were put into effect in hopes of decreasing the number of Aboriginals in jail. Throughout this presentation, we will examine the different perspectives, how it is addressed in Canada, and the challenges of Gladue reports. But first, let us define some key aspects regarding Gladue reports.
Under Section 718.2e of the Criminal Code of Canada, Gladue refers to the right that Aboriginal offenders have. This portion of the Criminal Code entails that any other punishment, other than imprisonment, must be considered as long as it is reasonable to the circumstance. Furthermore, it must be consistent with the harm done to the victims or community, with particular attention to Aboriginal offenders. Some examples that are taken into consideration when it comes to Gladue reports include residential schools, history regarding sexual and physical abuse, health issues, and colonialism. A Gladue report is a pre-sentencing report, which is prepared by a caseworker or probation officer to help the judge decide what sentence to give the offender. The R v. Gladue case decision was made amongst the Supreme Court of Canada in regards to an individual named Jamie Gladue, concerning her crime and her association with Section 718.2e as an Aboriginal offender. Implicit bias is a cognitive bias that, rather than being neutral or non-biased in a situation, we unconsciously have an aversion or preference when it comes to the attitudes of people and their associated stereotypes.
Gladue reports help to lessen the overrepresentation of Aboriginals in jail. They take into consideration cultural perspective, which gives more awareness on how colonization has affected Aboriginals. Events such as the 60s scoop, residential schools, systemic racism, and intergenerational trauma have influenced the lives of Aboriginal people. They bring an element of understanding about the individual because of the depth of information being shared. Judges and lawyers have to see the defendant as a person instead of just another case. Gladue reports are therapeutic because they help individuals find themselves, and it gives them the opportunity to get resources they are not able to get themselves. Therapy and emotional support from Gladue workers help to gain perspective as to why the person committed the crime. It helps the person to heal and begin their way to rehabilitation. Many people are against Gladue reports because they are expensive and many people cannot afford them. They are very time-consuming due to the extent of information and the amount of people needed. It takes a team of individuals to assess and address the reports. Gladue reports were developed to combat overrepresentation of Aboriginals in prisons. Because of this, people often see them as get-out-of-jail-free cards. Gladue reports are used to draw attention to the individual's past and do not ensure less jail time. Some people see them as not being fair because they are only offered to Aboriginals.
In Canada, since the Supreme Court's ruling, Siksika First Nation was one of the first to address Gladue reports in Canada, incorporating them in pre-sentencing reports, which take the principles outlined in Gladue into consideration. Siksika was able to use these primarily because they are one of the few First Nations to have a court on its land and one of the only First Nation to have a full-time partnership with a legal aid society. It wasn't until 2014 that Alberta announced that it would provide an additional $200,000 to Native counseling services to further develop Gladue reports in a specific format as to how they should be used. At the time, the reports were done sporadically by the probationary officers and other members of the justice system, One of the main concerns of the Native Counseling Services was to include an individual who they themselves have extensive knowledge of having historic trauma, intergenerational trauma, and an understanding of the First Nation community. With the inclusion of such an individual, the hope would be to develop a more accurate account of the circumstances of the accused. To look at a specific case, we can analyze Richard Wolfe, one of the founders of the Indian Posse Street Gang. The report seemed to be crucial for Justice Leon Schwann pertaining to the sentencing of Wolfe in relation to his latest convictions of sexual assault and assault with a weapon. Wolfe's lawyer, Kim Stenson, was quoted saying Gladue reports are immensely valuable and helped drop the prison term from 10 years, which the Crown originally wanted, to 5 years. Stinson further commented, they in fact take the time to flesh out people's backgrounds and try to get behind the scenes. Usually when you do a pre-sentence report, it's a snapshot in time, where a Gladue report is more lifelong. Unfortunately, the funding and finding trained individuals to do them still remains, as in Wolfe's case, are left to be funded by the defense.
One of the main challenges the Gladue Report faces is the aspect of finding competent and educated workers who meet all of the job requirements. Due to the fact that the Gladue Report can and is most often a sensitive topic to handle, it is always essential to find workers who are not only able to get the job done, but also able to fit into the position adequately. As an example, we found the job description for a Gladue Report worker in Thunder Bay. Some of the many requirements include a university degree or 5 years of working experience, the ability to speak an Aboriginal language, preferably Ojibwe or Cree, and the ability to meet deadlines. The issue occurs when, although many wish to help with Gladue reports, not everyone meets the requirements and are therefore unable to be hired, and this causes a lack of Gladue report workers. Due to the high demand of Gladue reports, finding workers is an aspect which is highly needed but rarely found. Another challenge that the Gladue Report faces is funding. The average Gladue Report can cost around $800. I don't know about many of you, but it would not be easy to obtain that amount of money. The Canadian Centre of Policy Alternatives conducted a study that says that in Saskatchewan, 69% of Aboriginal children live in poverty. Not only that, but around 60% of offenders are of Aboriginal descent. This therefore means that around 66,000 Aboriginal offenders are incarcerated and in most cases in need of a Gladue report. With such a high demand, more and more resources are needed and the price therefore rises. Now putting those statistics in mind, it's easy to see that not many Aboriginal offenders can afford to have a Gladue report done and then risk being mistreated in the court. Racism is a huge problem when it comes to the Gladue reports, and it is one of the many reasons this report was created. In Canada, it has been proven that non-Aboriginal offenders have committed more violent crimes than Aboriginal offenders. Due to the racism in the justice system, 50 to 60% of non-Aboriginal people who commit these crimes get probation or can post bail. But in contrast, 60 to 70% of Aboriginal violent offenders will serve jail time. Due to this aspect of racism, although it is a legal right for the Aboriginal offender, many judges disregard the Gladue reports and punish based on their implicit bias.